Well, the trade deadline has passed, so how do the players think it all went? Joining us from the Players Association is Ian Prendergast. Ian, thanks so much for your time. Well, there's been a lot of movement this trade period, hasn't there? And free agency went really well as well.
Yeah, it has gone well. I think it's a really positive thing for the game, in terms of not only the opportunity it gives the individual players to choose their own employer towards the end of their career, but also in terms of the interest that it adds to the competition overall. I think it's certainly spiced up some of the rivalries we'll see next year, but it's also encouraged clubs to focus really strongly on developing a supporting environment for their players, because we've seen players show a desire to go to clubs that have a really good culture.
The big question that fans and the media are asking is this whole window too long?
Yeah, we've obviously received some complaints about the length of the period. We're certainly open to discussing that as part of the review. We'd be reluctant to shorten it if it was to impact in an adverse way on the amount of deals that are struck during that time, but we're certainly open to having that discussion.
So there is a review that's going to be conducted post this period. What else is on the agenda as far as the Players Association goes? Do you want more out of the free agency window?
Oh, I think we always understood that when it was introduced, it was quite balanced, so that everyone had comfort with it being undertaken as something that the industry agreed on. And we were probably the only professional sport in the world that didn't have some form of free agency for our players. So it's definitely been a softly approach. I think everybody's taken to it in a really professional way. Now it's probably a good time to have a look at it to see whether we are striking the right balance. And that'll take into consideration the eligibility criteria, whether compensation is still necessary for clubs that lose a free agent, as well as the length of the trade period as we've discussed.
Compensation is one of the big issues. Do you think that we'll see that phased out over time?
We may do. I think it's largely insignificant in terms of the compensation that clubs have received for unrestricted free agents in particular. But even for the restricted free agents, you can mount a pretty strong argument that it's not necessary, on the basis that those clubs free up salary cap space that they can then use to go and secure other players, or to pay their own players on their list. So from that point of view, it does seem a little bit inconsistent with free agency, and we had a view prior to it being introduced that it wasn't necessary. So we're interested in discussing that with the AFL and clubs.
You mentioned the eligibility criteria. At the moment, it's 8 and 10 in terms of years served for a club. What do you think about that? Could it be brought back a bit? Could it be 6 and 8 or something like that?
I think it could. At the moment, 8 years at the one club is a significant period of time, considering the average career. So it is quite onerous in terms of the criteria that a player has to meet before he is eligible to exercise his rights as a free agent. So from that point of view, perhaps it can be pulled back slightly. Again, that's something we're looking forward to discussing with the AFL and clubs to try and strike the right balance. And we understood this would be constantly reviewed throughout.
The biggest move of the free agency period was Lance Franklin, obviously. What do you make of the storyline that goes with that, the rivalry between Greater Western Sydney and Sydney? Is the Players Association comfortable with how that all unfolded?
Yeah, we are. I think it's really positive for the game that a club was prepared to invest in a player to that extent. It's certainly going to add a lot of interest up in the New South Wales market, which again will be good for the game. And yeah, it'll be really interesting to see how the rivalry even between Sydney and Hawthorn plays out next year, and it's already ensured they play each other twice.
That's an advantage to Buddy, obviously, that he gets a mega contract. Does free agency in any way disadvantage the lower ranked players in clubs, the guys that are just struggling to maintain their spot on a list?
I think we're seeing it have an impact in a range of ways. So we're seeing players move to get further opportunities once they are eligible for free agency, or even after they're delisted, in terms of making it very straightforward with respect to them moving to another club. So from that point of view, it's a positive for players that potentially aren't getting the opportunities that they would otherwise get elsewhere. And then in terms of the star players, it's certainly showing the value that clubs see in those players, which is what they deserve based on it being a more open market. But we're also seeing clubs contract players out of free agency, therefore more long-term deals getting struck to avoid the player coming out within that free agency window. So overall, I think there's benefit in it for all players, regardless of their position on the list, which is a positive thing and something we were hoping would occur when it was introduced.
Thanks for your time, Ian. Appreciate it.
No worries. Thanks, Matt. Cheers.